Hi, so I'm Denise Hurley. I'm a senior geographic analyst in the population division at the Department of City Planning. And I'm really excited about showing you how I use R to create interactive documents. So it's a little bit different from the other presentations you may have seen this week. So I'm not showcasing data, but showing you how you can take all of this awesome data that you've seen this week and incorporate it into a document. So I'm going to first go over some open source publishing options that we have, and then tell you why Quarto is my favorite publishing system. And then I'll go over some basics of how to get started, and including how to visualize your data, and then formatting the data, and then ending with some notes about scholarly writing. So within the R ecosystem, there's several options for creating interactive documents and books. So many of you, if you've used R, you may be familiar with R Markdown or Bookdown. R Markdown is for creating HTMLs. You can also render to PDFs, a bit clunky. Bookdown is for books. Distill is for technical documents, and there's many more. But what happens when you want to do all of them in one document? So what we have now is Quarto. It's a new publishing system, which with just using a few lines of code, you can go between different outputs, and you can render using multiple languages. So briefly, Quarto is an open source publishing system, and it allows you to combine your analysis, your text, graphics, and references all in one document. And you can take that and share it either by posting it online using GitHub or Quarto Pub, but you can also share it as a standalone document. So one of its strongest features is it can use multiple programming languages. So with R, if you're using R Markdown, you basically are kind of stuck with using R, and then you write with Markdown. But with Quarto, you can use Julia, Python, observable, HTML, JavaScript. And this is really a great strength of the system, because if you're collaborating with people and they have different skill sets, you can still work on the same document. So one person may use R, the other person is using Python, but you can still work together. So I'm going to show you how I've been using it. So in 2013, we updated our flagship document, which is the newest New Yorker. So back in 2013, you can see here that it was a PDF. We also have a hard copy. And so it's a bit clunky that in order to give people tables, they had to come to our website and download it separately. The PDFs are great, but you're limited in the content that you can show. You have to either cut out some information or label a lot. So what I've done this time, we're updating our book for this latest version, is I wrote it in Quarto. So I'm going to open a new tab. It's really large, so it wouldn't open in the presentation. So let's just switch out of here for a moment. So hopefully you can all see this screen. So this illustrates the different languages that I've used to create this. The chart was used, I wrote it using JavaScript. And you can see here with the tooltips, you can have more information without cluttering your figure with a bunch of annotations. So only when someone hovers over it, you can get more information. The same with the table that was made using JavaScript, just to show you the outline. So I was able to add our logo. We have our contents here on the left, a nice drop-down menu to help people navigate between the different chapters in the book. You can link outside, and these are cross-references, so you can link to different sections in the book. Drop-down boxes and I have even maps and other charts. So I'm going to go over these basics, but this is just an overview of something simple that anyone can create. And I'm going to give you the basics for getting started with something like this. So let's go back. The other strength of Quarto is that it can render to multiple outputs with just a few lines of code, which is great if you want to share this. Some people only read in Word, or sometimes people want something that's print ready, like a PDF, but then you can post it on a website using HTML. So it's great that you don't have to reformat it each time that you want to have a different output. And I'll show you how you can do that, and you can just create just these multiple outputs, and it's really great. So on our website, I have a document that I created using Quarto. So this is a much simpler version of the newest New Yorker. This is using decennial data, and you can see that it's similar with your table of content. And these are static images, but then also, people can expand it. So this is very simple code to write this. But the beauty of it, I just said format to PDF, and it was able to, this is a screenshot on the right, is a screenshot of a PDF page. So it kept my footnotes, references, and it's all in one, and the same document, and I was able to embed it within the HTML, which was great. So unlike other art products, you have to download Quarto directly, and you do that by going to their website, and you can see that you can use it in RStudio, Jupyter, or you have other options. So it's not just restricted to R users. But even if you're using it in R, you can use other languages. So I'm going to show you how you can start your website, and I'll stick to a simple HTML example. So I'll walk you through this. So when you start, after you download it, you'll get an option under Files for starting a Quarto document or a Quarto presentation. But if you're starting a website for the first time, you don't want to start with a document because there's additional information that you need to add to that. So instead, you're going to start a new project, and you'll start a Quarto project. And this should be familiar to anyone who uses R. It's a similar setup. So rather than an R project, you'll have a Quarto project. And then our project is the website. So once you click on that, you'll get the option to add a project name, and then you can open it in a new session. And here I have used Visual Markdown Editor unselected, and that's a personal preference, but I will note that the Visual Markdown Editor is a really good transition for someone who is maybe used to working in Word and so writing syntax is brand new to them. So you can click on the visual editor, and it's a more sedated Clippy. For those of you who remember Microsoft Clippy, where it kind of gives you some tooltips and suggestions of how to, if you don't know how to bold your text, or if you don't know how to add an image, you can do that in the visual editor. I personally do not use it because I find it distracting, but I can see it's a good transition for someone who's just getting started. But we'll focus on the source one here. So once you open your website, you'll see that you'll get 4 documents, and then you have your project here. So I'll go over the main ones, which are quite important to setting up a website. And the first one is a YAML, which stands for yet another Markdown language. But basically, this is your metadata. This is where you tell Quarto, this is how I want and here we have it saying that this is my project. The project type is website. If you're creating a book, that would be changed to book. or whatever type that you're working on. And then here comes the attributes for the website. So you can add your title. You can also add author's name, the navigation bars. So if you remember a few slides ago, I showed you the Newest New Yorker and I had the drop-down menu. This is how I set it up. So you can change the name. So the name on the drop-down menu is home rather than about. And then you format your HTML here. And this is also where you would add format PDF or format Word. It would just go underneath the format option. So with HTML, you get a theme. And these are Bootstrap themes. And you can go to the Bootstrap website and look at what themes you like. But you can also change it. You don't have to take whatever is given to you out of the box, but you can adjust it or write your own using the cascading style sheet. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, but just know that this is where you format how it would look, how your website would look in print and on the screen, and then if you're formatting it for a mobile phone. And the last line here is that it includes a table of contents. So the next document that's crucial is the index. So every website needs an index. If you are adding this, for example, to GitHub, it requires an index first, and the index is your landing page. This is the first page that people will come to. So this is the reason if you're making a website for the first time, it's better to start with a project rather than just a standalone HTML. You could do that, but you have to rename the index when you try to publish it. And then again, here's your style sheet, and you can see, I didn't share my example, but I have the main style sheet, and then I also have my edited version. So I include both of those under the format. So I'll have style S, and then I have my copy. So now we'll go over some basics of Quarto. So these are the things that I find that I'm using over and over again. And they're quite useful to know, and it's really how you build your document. So one of the most important things, and probably one of the strengths of Quarto, is the code block. And this allows you to use R within your document. So you can conduct your analyses, you can pull your data, analyze your data, and it's all within the code block. So if you've used the R console, this should look familiar. So it starts off with, you have 3 ticks, and then you state what engine you're using or programming language. So in my case, I'm using R, so that goes in the brackets. And then the next line, this is sort of your mini metadata for the code block. So in this example, I'm telling it to put my output in the next column. So when you write your metadata, you write a hashtag first and then a pipe. So it's hash pipe. Quarto is pretty literate that it will suggest syntax for you, and it also flags if you wrote incorrect syntax. So starting with a simple example, 1 + 1, I'll put that in my code block, and you can see my output on the right. So 1 + 1, indeed, it's 2. So that's a pretty simple example to get you started. And then you always close your code block with 3 ticks. Just remember in Quarto likes symmetry. So when you start a code block, or later when we get to fence divs, everything usually comes in 3s, and then it has to mirror each other. So I'll walk you through how to download ACS data from the Census Bureau's website using the Census API. And the API is just a way that 2 computers talk to each other. So looking at this code block, how I have it set up, again, we see my 3 ticks and then my engine. And then, so I'll ignore the metadata because in this example, I'm just showing, put my output in the next slide. And then, so next in line 5, we see the library. So you can add all of your libraries here. And then this is my API code. And then I take my data and I can clean it up here. I'm not going to go into detail with this, but I use dplyr to clean up my data and also the tidy package to get my census data. And so this is the output. So it's a little bit messy. It's in its raw format, but this is what I'm going to use throughout the rest of the presentation to create the example charts and tables. So the next is fence div, and this is a pandoc fence div. And fence divs are blocks of code, and this is how you format your layout. And also, so if you are familiar with HTML at all, when you use a span, it's usually like just one word. But with a fence div, you actually can add attributes to entire blocks of text or figures. So it's, again, it's similar to the code block where you have, instead of 3 ticks, you have 3 consecutive colons. And then you add your class name, whatever class, and I'll show you some examples of what a class is. And then you write your text inside, and then you close it with, again, with 3 ticks. Sometimes if you're writing multiple things, you want to close your class in brackets, just like with R when I entered my programming language. So there's a couple of options of setting up your fence div, but the key thing is that you must have 3 consecutive colons and everything must be even. So I'm going to show you how I take a fence div and I create 2 columns. So in this example, I first say, okay, Quarto, I want to make some columns. And in line 3, I tell it that my column width will be, for the first one is 45%. And then in here, I'm just adding my code block. So I'm making a figure in here, and then later on, I'll go explain how to make a figure in detail. But this is just to show you how to set up your fence div. So, and oops, let's go back here. And then I close it with my 3 colons. And then here I say, this is my second column. And the width, I want it to be slightly larger, 50. The page is always 100%, so you can have anything divisible by 100, so you can create as many columns as you want, but as long as it's readable. And then, so this closes the fence div for this column, but if you remember, we told Quarto that we're making a column. So this one also is closed. In a previous version of Quarto, you had to make this 6 consecutive ones, but now everything is in 3s, so you don't have to worry about making your fence at the end a bit larger. You can still use 3 and it still works. So this is the output. I have my figure on the left and my text. There's cross-references here. And then also just a preview that there's some additional information here in my figure. So the next thing is a tab set, which is a cool feature, I think. So you can use a tab set if you want your users to toggle between boxes on your page. So you're using a fence div again, but your class will be a panel tab set. And so you start with your 3 consecutive colons, and then to label your tab set, you use 3 hash marks, 3 hashtags, and then a space. And then you put in your content, and then you repeat it. So this second one starts the next tab set, and then your content, and then you close it. And you can put as many tabs as you want. And so we'll just go here. So this is what a tab set looks like. I have my chart here, and I can toggle to have notes, or you can put whatever you want in a second tab here. And then next we have call out blocks. So in the example with the newest New Yorker, I had a drop down call out block for some source information about the data source. So again, we see the fence divs. So fence divs are a huge component of Quarto, and they're so easy to use, and you can do so much with formatting. So my class this time is called a call out note, but you also can have a call out tip, warnings, cautions, and important. You can change the colors using the YAML or a CSS. So let's say that you don't like having the icon here and you don't like that, you can change that. So in this example, I say icon is false. And if I don't want the color, I can say to use a simple format. So, and this is what I used in the newest New Yorker, and I removed the icon. I changed it to be collapsible. And then I changed the label. So it's labeled as a note, but then I don't know if you remember, but I actually changed the name to box. So when it's referred to in the document, it's actually referred to box and not a note. So these are some things that you can customize Quarto with. So here we have my fence div, and then I have the attribute information for the callout block. And this is the final output. In the presentation, you can't collapse it, but if you did, it would be, you would have a little icon here. The last is cross-references. So you can reference anything in your document. You just have to add a label. And your figures and your tables and sections are numbered automatically. And this is great. So I don't know if any of you write in Word or another software and you delete a figure or you want to move things around and then you have to go back and renumber it. You don't have to do this in Quarto. It does it automatically. So it's very simple to make your content referenceable. You just add a hashtag and you want it to be closed. So with a figure is hashtag fig with a dash, hashtag table TBL, and hashtag sec. And so you can use this when you actually refer to it in your document, you change the syntax to an at. So the hashtag is used in your label, and then the at syntax is used to refer to it. So in this example here, I'm referring my readers to this table. So I say at table and then my table label. So this part, the label and table will be the same. The only difference is if you're referring to it, and the hashtag is if you're setting up your label. And so this is what it would look like. And you can also customize this. So if you don't like table, you can have like tab with a period or TBL. You can change all of this in your YAML. So now we'll look at how you can incorporate some visualizations. So we've seen this chart before, but I'm going to show you some key features that you would need to set up a figure. So if we're doing it in a code block, with this example, I'm using a JavaScript wrapper to work in R. You could also use JavaScript directly if you want, or you can also use other languages. But in this, so I have my code block. I set it up here with my 3 ticks again. And then, so with the figure, going back to the previous example when we were talking about cross-referencing, this is the label. So if you're making a label inside of a code block, then you use the hash pipe. You don't have to put a hash in front of figure. You just use the hash pipe here. So this is my label. And they have to be unique in the document. You'll get an error message if you try to have 2 figures with the same name. And then next, you can add your caption. And so this is just an example. So I'm using HighCharts, which is a JavaScript program for writing figures. And then we see here, this is the output. So, but let's say that you have one, you don't want to write any code, or you have a bunch of figures that you've already made elsewhere and you want to incorporate that, that's easy. You just use a fence div. So here we have my fence div, and then this is an example of you using the hashtag plus fig. So my label is foreign born, and then you use markdown language, which is exclamation point, two brackets, and then parentheses, and then you put in the path name. You can add some attributes here, telling Quarto, okay, this is how big I want, and this is how I want it centered. Before you close your fence div, then the last line will be your caption. So it's a little bit different from using a code block. But there are other ways. If you have an HTML widget that, let's say you made a bunch of figures in Tableau, or you have a dashboard that you want to bring in, you can use an iframe for that. And I'll show you an example when we get to maps. But what's great about Quarto is that it really meets you at where your needs are. So if you want to incorporate things that you made outside of Quarto, that's completely fine. If you don't want to write a lot of code, that's also fine. You can still do a lot and then have this in an interactive document. So now with maps, we'll start with Leaflet Maps, and Leaflet is a open source Java script library for making interactive maps. So if I'm making Leaflet, I would put that in a code block again. So this is, I call the Leaflet library using library Leaflet. And then my tiles, so I'm using Stadia for this one, but you can bring in any. I think New York City has its own tile that you can incorporate into your map. And you can see here on the right, and you can add as much as you want. So I just put a little pop-up where we are here at 120 Broadway. So you can add interactive features. And if you remember well, I didn't actually show the map, but the one in the Newest New Yorker, I have a lot of pop-ups and additional information. So you can add that. But let's say that you don't want to write a leaflet map and you have a lot of maps that you made in ArcGIS or some other HTML widget. You can incorporate one, if it's a static map, you can add it as an image. But if it's ArcGIS Online, you can use iframe. So this is a very simple syntax for it. This part here is just HTML to tell that this map is centered. So this is a paragraph syntax that's unrelated to iframe. But it says here, so it starts with iframe, and then you set your parameters, your height and your width. And then SRC stands for source. So this is where you tell it, this is where I'm getting it from. This particular widget I got from Population Division's Map Viewer, and I incorporated that widget and I transformed it into an HTML. But you could also just grab the embed URL from ArcGIS website and add it. It's just a little bit neater when you make it as an HTML. So you can also embed websites. You can embed, it has a similar embed feature. You can also embed video. So iframe brings in all types of interactive content, HTML widgets, which is what ArcGIS maps are, and it also brings in video. So you can see the map from our page is fully functional. It has the information that you would get from the website. So the last is tables. So again, you see your 3 ticks and the engine. And it's very similar to figures that you set up your label, but instead of fig, you have table. And then you add your name, your caption. And you can bring in libraries. In this case, I'm just using a table called G library to create my table. And this is a very simple table. Most of the time you would style it out a bit more. You can also create markdown tables or HTML tables, or you can import Excel tables fully formatted and you can add that in as an image, or you can import it to convert it into a more stylized version of it. And again, you see here, we have our cross-reference there. And so when you write in Quarto, you use Markdown, and it's a very simple language. There's a lot of resources online. So if you're new to this, you can get some cheat sheets, and also in Quarto, if you go to the visual screen, it can show you how to transfer it into Markdown. So you would use a hashtag with a space for level 1 headers. Level 2 is just 2, so it's quite simple, and 3 and so forth for each header style. Footnotes are very simple. You add a caret here, and then you put the information that will be in the footnote in brackets. So it's and you would do a similar thing if you're hyperlinking text. Emphasis is quite simple. So 2 asterisks for bold, 1 for italics. And then block quotes, you use the greater than sign here. And then, so here it has this pipe and the text is blue. That's the default. But you can write a very simple code in your CSS to change it so that it looks nicer. So if you're submitting it for publication and they have certain standards for how your quote should look, you can change that. You can use a span. So with the fence div, you change the entire block of text, but with a span, it's for individual words or for a sentence. So you can it's very similar setup to bringing in a figure. So you have your brackets around the word that you're changing, and then you say the style, color, blue. You can also, instead of writing blue, you can use a hex color to change it. So remember, spans are just for one or two elements in your document. And adding dashes is really easy. So double dash for an end dash and 3 dashes for an end. Lists, very simple, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can have an ordered list by using the hyphen. You can use a span to add information to the margin. So let's say you have a commentary or you just want extra room. You can use the aside span for this. And so this is an example of how I used it in the contextualizing change document that's on our website. So I put the figure and information in the margin. You can also use the aside with a fence div. And you can, if you're using a code block, you can add it in your code block that you want your information to go in the margin. So you can add a figure or a chart in the margin, which is pretty cool. So, and then you could also just add it by writing a span for your column margin. And this here, this is great, but you can also add alternative text. So it explains like what it is. So that's where you would write it. And so finally, we'll get to scholarly writing. This is our last section. And this is actually what drew me to Quarto, because I wanted to have an option where I can use citations as well as write my document and then have it interactive. And not all of the systems and packages out there handle citations well. So Zotero, which is an open source reference management system, and Quarto are best friends. They work so well together. If you haven't used Zotero, it's like EndNote, a little bit better than EndNote because open source, and you can add you have more flexibility in how you organize your bibliography and your references. So in Quarto, under your global options, you will select R Markdown, click on citations, and then connect it to your Zotero library. It also works with the Zotero Online. So that's an option for you. And so what you do is you add this to your YAML. So here, this is my title of my document. And the bibliography, you have to add, so this is where your references will go. And then you can add your style guide. You can get that from Zotero's website and download it and add it to your Quarto project. And then to get it into your documents, you just use a fenced div. So it would be hashtag references. So wherever that goes, wherever you put that is where your references will go. Just to note, if you're making a book, it always puts it at the end. But if you have an HTML page, you can just say where you want your references to go. And then what is really neat, you can actually format this for scholarly publication. So if you're submitting to a journal, Quarto has a lot of templates for you to use for many of the major publishers. There, you can download the template and it will format your article to the specifications for that journal, which is fantastic. And if you are an academic, many universities have templates for master's and PhD theses. So you can check that out to see if your university has one. If you're a student, and it takes the guesswork out of formatting. So you can find this on Quarto's website. So that's the end. I hope this has inspired you to create your own document. And I would love to hear if you created something. I will add my email to the chat, so feel free to share with me anything you created, and I'm here to answer any questions in our last 10 minutes.
I think the first one came in earlier from Janu, and it was towards the very beginning of your presentation, and they're asking, I think it was how Quarto was different than Jupyter Notebooks.
So Quarto is more of a publishing system. So you can use it within Jupyter Notebook. You can use it within RStudio. So it's not a platform in itself. It's more of a publishing system. So if you are a Python user, you can download Quarto and then use it inside to create your document. I don't use Python. I learned on R as a geospatial scientist because R was great for mapping. But so I'm not that familiar with Jupyter Notebook, but just to know that it's sort of limited in like creating text, but you can use Quarto, Python within Quarto to write, and then you can create your figures and analyze your data within Quarto. So just the example where I showed the 3 ticks and the engine, my engine was R, your engine would be Python instead.
Another question we have a couple of questions from Juliet actually. The first saying that, I think it was earlier when you were doing the demo, it says, it looks like the number isn't always indicating a comment in the different files. Can you explain what that indicates?
The number doesn't always indicate the comment.
Hi, sorry for the confusion. I just meant that usually in R, a hashtag indicates a comment, and is not actually code. And so I was wondering if you could describe the different ways that a hashtag is used in Quarto.
Sure, I actually have an example. So here, I actually commented this out because we don't want to pull data in the middle of a presentation. So you can see here, it's a similar thing. This is commenting out my API call and all of this because I didn't, so this is background noise, but it only works if you use the right syntax. So if you're using hashtag figure, it's not going to be noted as a comment because it's outside of a code block. So if you wrote hashtag figure within your code block, then it's going to read it as a comment. But if you write hashtag figure outside, so think of the code block as like your native R or your native Python. But when you're outside of it in Quarto itself, and let me pull up an example from figure. So here is the difference. This is in Quarto and outside of the code block. So this will not read as a comment because it's not in the R universe. So you only see R if it's in the R engine. Does that make sense? It will only read as a comment if it's in the R engine. If it's outside of it, it will read as a syntax or a figure for a cross-reference or something similar. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
I think Juliet actually had another question about if you could talk about situations when you'd want to use multiple coding language, i.e., for example, when Quarto would be especially useful.
So Quarto is really your publishing system. And so think of it as like a house, but you can invite as many people as you want to your house and whomever you want to socialize with at that moment. So thinking of programming languages, Quarto is just housing them. So you use the best language for the job. So, or based on your skill set. So sometimes I'll use JavaScript or I'll use HTML. But the beauty of Quarto is that you can use it all within the same document. I don't have to switch out and do something different. I can use observable. One of the things I didn't show was that you can do a lot of cross-talking. You can have dashboards embedded within it. You can use D3, which is great. I happen to use the R ecosystem, but you can use whatever one that you want. But although I'm using R as my ecosystem, I'm not limited to using Knitter, which is the R engine. So you can use as many. I'll just switch to the slide with R. So these are some of the languages that you can use within it. Just think of it as a system for publishing that you can use multiple languages within. And it's great for collaborating in that sense, but also it gives you the options to use the best thing for the job that you want to have, and you're not hemmed in to one type of language.
Oh, good. Actually, there were a few questions. I'm wondering if you could share your coding notes.
Really, these were just examples for the presentation. This is not unique to Quarto. This is R, and then I'm using dplyr library. So there's not much to share with this.
Someone was asking potentially about a GitHub. And someone else remarked that it may seem that people think that this is Jupyter Notebook.
Oh, yeah, I was wondering about that. So no, it's not Jupyter Notebook. You can use Jupyter Notebook. I use RStudio, which is for R. So it's a little bit different, but no, I haven't shared my code on GitHub. I may do that after we finish the newest New Yorker book, but right now that is in progress. So there's nothing to share while it's in a draft copy, but I will likely put that in, but it will be a while. So just to reiterate, Quarto is just your system. So you can use whatever mapping software that you want. So you can use ArcGIS for your visuals. Quarto is not actually writing your mapping software. It's not a mapping software. It's just a publishing system that you can bring in different languages. So you can bring ArcGIS visual online if you want to. So it's for writing documents or creating dashboards or presentations. For example, I use this to make my presentation, but it's not a replacement for ArcGIS or working in R, but it's just how you can incorporate text alongside your visuals. So just going back to my document here, this was made in Quarto, so it's really my text, but I have visuals in here, and then in my switching screens, and here I have a map. I didn't make this map. I made this with Leaflet and not in ArcGIS, but you can bring in an ArcGIS map, but it's really for people who want to write and then have interactive content. Or just have a way to have open source coding. Many of us who write don't have a coding background. And this is a great way to incorporate figures and charts, especially interactive figures and charts, into your document. That's the difference, is to help you publish content. Like ArcGIS is just making maps. I mean, there's story maps, but that's even limited, and it's not for text heavy things. So this is really if you want to have some writing next to your images.
There was a question, can you export from Quarto to Notion or GoodNotes?
You can export it. So when you format it into an HTML or a PDF or other document, you can upload it to GitHub. My document is hosted on GitHub, and then we have it also on our website, but you can use whatever server that you would use for publishing. So GitHub, DigitalOcean, and so forth. But you can also share it as a standalone document that you can email it. All of those, well, except DigitalOcean, most of those are public. But if you have something, so for example, our document is in draft form, so we're not sharing it with people, so I can just email it or put it on our server. But yeah, so you can publish it wherever, and there's a lot of information on Quarto's website about how to get your content onto a publishing website like GitHub or DigitalOcean. And there are plenty of free ones like Posit and Quarto Pub.
There's so many great questions coming in. Let's see. I guess Emily remarked, this all looks so cool. Are there useful tutorials you found to help people train themselves in Quarto?
I learned by just trial and error, just seeing how things work. But Quarto has a great, actually, I'm just going to navigate to their site here. So you can find a lot of guides if you go to quarto.com. And this is, if you can still see my screen, there's a lot of basics in here just to get you started. And I find that the language is quite intuitive, that you can, once you learn the basics, you can build on that to customize it. But starting here with their guide is a great way to get started with Quarto. And then also they have a Stack account that you can, a forum, I'm sorry, that you can look at to see what, to troubleshooting things. But yeah, so this can help you get started with that. But there are a ton of resources. It's still new, so it doesn't have as many guides as others. But if you've used R before, it's very similar to an extent. So if you use like R Markdown for writing, some of the syntax is similar. But I would start with the guide on their website.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Denise. Thank you so much for a great session and for all the work that you've done in teaching us these great skills. And
thanks, Gabby.